Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories, where we play tales to take you away from today. Now, I know I've said this before, but this time it's so true that I had to cut stuff. No. We have a jam-packed show full of stories. Ron's Amazing Stories that will take you from a ghostly hitchhiker to a scary nun.
Amazing!
And then from a frightening stampede to a family turned out into the Canadian winter. I said a family into the winter. Now I can't wait any longer, so let's start this puppy. What I have to say is we've finally got a decent archive page. That's right, the old one was bad. Let's just face reality on that fact. It was cumbersome, hard to use, and you couldn't even stream the shows. Well, a huge thank you to the folks at Internet Archive for setting me up with a full page. All of the shows that are not on the live site are there. Now, how do you find it? Simple. Head to archive.org and search for Ron's Amazing Stories. That's it, and please enjoy the old stuff. It'll take you back in time. On Ron's Amazing Stories, we've always had stories for you and by you. This week, I'm going to do something that I've never done before. We're going to have 3 listener tales on the same show. Now, this is a bit scary to do this because I'm worried that you might get a bit tired of hearing my voice. But in the end, these 3 tales are worth it. So, let's get started. Our first story comes from Dwayne Watley of Santa Fe, New Mexico. For those of you that listen to the podcast a lot, I know what you're saying. Another one from New Mexico? This is the 9th strange tale to come from the state whose motto is Cresciti Undo, or translated from Latin, that means it grows as it goes. It appears that oddness is not limited to fantastic stories in New Mexico. Dane writes, I hear you like strange stories from New Mexico. Here's my entry. I was driving from Santa Fe to Las Vegas. Now, before you think that this is a long story, I'm talking about Las Vegas, New Mexico, population 14,565, and not a slot machine in sight. However, there is a lot of lonely road to the city. I was about a half an hour out when I see on the side of the road an old car broke down. There beside it was even an older man with his thumb out. I stopped and asked if he needed help, to which he said, "Oh my, yes." He hopped in the car and said that he needed a ride to Las Vegas. We drove, and right off the bat I thought this guy was strange. He was talking like he was from another era. His name was Jimmy, and he talked a lot about Roswell, but it was the way he was talking. You would think that it all just happened. I ignored it, and the truth was it was nice to have someone to chat with. Just before we got to town, he said this was a fine place and I could drop him there. I pulled over at a diner, and he hopped out, waved, and said goodbye. I started to drive away and happened to look back. He was gone. I mean, gone. There was no way he could have made it to the diner, and there was nothing else there. I went back to look. Nothing. I even checked a nearby runoff trench. He had completely disappeared. Now, I know it was a crazy thing to do, but I had to do it. I drove back to where I'd picked the guy up, and the car was gone. Nothing was there. I drove back to the diner and went inside. I must have had a certain look because the waitress asked, "Is everything okay, honey?" I told her my story, and after a bit of a silence, a giggle or two, she told me that I had just met Jimmy. The funny thing was, I had not told her his name. Wow. What is it about New Mexico? That is a very strange story, Dwayne, and I thank you for sharing it with us. Our next story is very close to home for me. It comes from Susan Bright of Portland, Oregon. Late one evening, the three of us were hanging out drinking beers when my friend Alex said he wanted to go up into the West Hills to check out a house for sale. Once in the car, he told us that it was actually an old run-down mansion with 26 rooms, and that it used to be a convent. It had been abandoned sometime in the 40s. It sat on 50 acres of property, including beautifully terraced grounds. I was feeling a little nervous about the whole thing. It was a funny time at night to be checking out houses, and I was convinced that Alex was more interested in adventure than in real estate. We pulled off the road and parked the car near a wooded area at the back of the property. The mansion itself was at the top of the hill. Of course, it was a typical cloudy Portland night, and the roadside was pitch black with no street lamps. I shivered as I followed Alex and Steve into the woods. It was a fairly long and spooky walk with only our flashlights to guide us. Finally, we came out onto an overgrown lawn. We looked up toward several terraces that seemed to stretch up and up. Nervously, I followed the boys up the stairs to the first and then second-tier terrace. The mansion loomed tall and ominous in the darkness. A strong wind had come up. It shook the treetops and moaned as it blew through the overgrown shrubbery. When we reached the top terrace, Alex and Steve moved towards the back doors of the mansion, determined to find a way inside. I hung back. There was no way I was getting any closer to that creepy monstrosity. I glanced up at the third story. 2 oval windows gaped like dark eyes. I trembled and said, "Guys, I don't feel right about this. Let's go." Suddenly, a ball of light appeared in the window. I blinked in surprise, and I thought, I'm sure Alex said the house was abandoned. At first, the light seemed to float from side to side. Then, before my astonished eyes, it expanded and formed into a glowing feminine figure. I felt my heart pound so hard in my chest that I thought it would explode. I tore my gaze away from the window and called out to Alex. "Alex," I whispered urgently, "let's get out of here." Something in my tone penetrated his thick head, and he and Steve loped over to where I was standing. As soon as they reached me, I took off at a pace that the best Olympic athlete would have had trouble matching. I had the engine running and the car turned around by the time Alec and Steve made it back to the road. They leapt inside and we took off. "You said the mansion was abandoned," I said accusingly. "It was. It is," said Alex. "Except for the killer nuns," Steve added from the back seat. I shrieked, "Killer nuns?" "Sure," Steve said, leaning forward between the 2 front seats and then glancing from me and then to Alex. "Didn't Alex tell you about Mary Mother Superior who fell from the 3rd-story window? She survived but lost her senses and faith. She started a cult and tortured any of her fellow sisters if they refused to join her. They chopped up the non-followers and burned their bodies in the fireplaces throughout the mansion. There was blood everywhere when the police came to investigate. They took Mary away to an asylum in Salem, Oregon, where she died. Her ghost is supposed to haunt the terraces at the back of the house. They say she tries to lead you into the mansion in order to torture and then kill you." Shivering, I dropped the boys off and went home. I don't know if Steve's story is true, but I do know what I saw. For the rest of the night, my dreams were filled with the glowing figure of a homicidal nun who chased me down endless terraces of the mansion lawn, holding an axe. Susan Bright, Portland, Oregon. Well, Susan, that is quite a story. As you might know, I live in Vancouver, Washington, which is a stone's throw away from Portland. In fact, the West Hills is about 7 miles away from me. I did a little research, and I found this. The Sisters of St. Mary of Oregon is a Roman Catholic religious community founded in 1886 in the U.S. state of Oregon. The Sisters Convent is now located in Beaverton, Oregon. However, the original Bethany Center was located on or near the site where the Portland Zoo now resides, which is squarely in the West Hills. Too creepy. Could that be where your mansion is? There are a lot of amazing homes up there. Susan, that was a great story, and I thank you for sharing. Our last listener story was originally told by C.F. Eckhart. I found this out through research. The email, however, suggested that it was written by the emailer. There is an author by the name of C.F. Eckhart on Amazon, and he wrote stories about Texas. C.F. passed away in 2015, which leads me to believe that this tale is most likely a rewritten Eckhart one. In the end, I decided to read it because I really can't know for sure, and it is an excellent tale. Because of this, I'm not going to tell you who the emailer was. Texas is a land of many legends. Some of them are just that, legends. Some of them have a germ of truth in them, and some of them are entirely true. At one time, when I was a young man, I had the opportunity to hear what some would call a legend from the man who experienced it. Lon Schuler had been a cowboy for as long as anyone could remember. He thought he was born in 1880, but he wasn't too sure about that. He was sure that he first went up the trail with the double-bar cattle drive in 1892. He said, "And I was just a button kid then." He worked as a nighthawk and a wrangler and was told he could catch up on his sleep next winter. In 1902, on another double-bar drive to Montana, Lon was with the last herd to drive on what's known as Stampede Mesa. Not many people know about Stampede Mesa these days, but from the early 1880s until the Texas cattlemen quit driving beef north, Stampede Mesa was and may still be one of the most haunted places in Texas. Go get a map of the state. One of the highway department maps will do. Look up where the eastern edge of the Panhandle hits the Red River. A little east and south of there, you'll see a lake called Blanco Canyon Reservoir. On the east side of that lake, you'll see a tiny peninsula of land jutting out into the lake. That's Stampede Mesa. It isn't a mesa in the sense of what you'd see in New Mexico or Arizona. It is a somewhat rocky slope with plenty of grass. On the east side is the dried-up McNeil Creek, which most folks know as McNeil Draw. On the west side ran North Blanco. There was a drop-off there into the draw of anywhere from 6 to 25 feet, and another drop-off into Blanco Canyon of nearly 200 feet at the highest point. These two drop-offs were natural fences. A trail boss could throw his herd into the point, put a light guard across the north end of the point, and rest the men, horses, and cattle for a couple days with plenty of grass and water. It was a very popular place to hold a herd. So the story goes, sometime in the early 1880s, a trail boss had some trouble there. A nester, unwanted farmer, had set himself up to the north holding point using posts and barbed wire. When the big herd came through, the nester's cows wrecked the wire and joined the herd. Of course, that nester demanded that the trail boss cut them out of his herd. The cowboys were tired, and so were the cows. The nester was told the herd would be cut after the men had rested. He got insistent, but ended up looking at the wrong side of a 6-shooter. He was told that the boss would cut the herd, and if he pushed the issue any further, there would be no need to cut the herd because, why? Because dead men ain't got no use for cows. The nester left with his drawers in a knot. At midnight, he put on a slicker and mounted his mule. He rode south along McNeil Draw until he was about centered on the herd. He then burst out of the brush, lapping the slicker and yelling and firing his Colt pistol into the air. The result was a stampede. The herd headed west and stampeded straight for the 200-foot drop-off into Blanco Canyon. At least half the herd went over, maybe more. After the cattle were finally milled, the boss began counting cowboys and came up one short. The man who had been on the west side of the herd had gone over with the cattle. He and his cowpony were both dead. How long it took to catch the nester, nobody seems to have recorded, but catch him they did. There was a debate, but the trail boss made the decision. The nester was bound and tied to the saddle on his mule. The mule was then blindfolded and pointed towards the drop-off. The nester was given a half a minute or so to make his peace, and then the boss laid the 6-shooter along the mule's rump and fired. The mule bolted straight for the drop-off, carrying the screaming nester with him. The cowboy was buried beneath a big cottonwood at the north end of the point. The nester, well, he was left to rot with the cows. The holding point at the North Blanco got an evil reputation. Herds that were held there variably stampeded to the west. If you tried to hold the area, you lost animals and sometimes men. The stampedes were caused by white things that came out of the bush on the east side. Ghosts of cattle and of cowboys? Who can say? However, this is what Old Lon told me. "Yeah, I reckon I was there," Lon said. "Spring of '02 it was. Me and a pal of mine, feller named George Rump, signed on for a drive going plumb to Montana. Got up to the North Blanco, and the boss says we're going to hold on the point. Let me tell you, about half the crew drew their time right then. Me and George, though, we were full of pus and vinegar, and ain't no way no spook story was going to scare us. Them old hands, they told us we was crazy if we stayed, but we gone done it anyway. Me and George, we drew the second watch. That's about 10 in the evening till about 2 in the morning. We decided to ride double circle, one of us going around the herd one way, one going the other. So we'd cross twice during each round, and we could say if we'd seen anything peculiar. It was right on towards midnight, and I was on the east side. That's when things started coming out of the brush. Looked like cows, but not like any cows I ever saw. They were plumb white as milk. They didn't make no sound at all, and it didn't look like they walked. They just sort of floated by. Now, I was riding a claybank gelding, one of the steadiest horses I ever had. Never knew that horse to shy at anything afore, but it sure didn't want nothing to do with them things. Trouble was, we couldn't get away from 'em. They was everywhere. I hit one with my hand, and it just went in. Felt like hitting into cold smoke. That's what it felt like. I hollered real loud, "Look out, George, they're gonna run." And sure enough, they did. George, he was on the west side. He had taken his lariat and commencing to hit the leaders in the nose, trying to turn 'em. Don't never let nobody tell you can turn a herd by shooting in front of them. All that does is scare 'em worse and make 'em run faster. Well, the fellows wasn't there and with me and George, and all they could do was pull their boots on and grab their saddle horses. While we did lose about 200 head, we managed to turn 'em and mill 'em to keep the rest from going over the side. That trail boss, He comes boiling at me and hollering, "Damn it, Lon," he says. "'Twas your holler that started that run. I ought to pull your horse off and stomp your head in." Now, George, he wasn't a cussed sort of fellow. Oh, he'd say a word now and then, but he wasn't a big cusser. He laid into that trail boss, and I swear he called him everything but a white man. When he got through, he told that feller that if Lon hadn't hollered when he did, I'd be down there with them cows. We was up there, you wasn't. That wasn't no flying nighthawk or rabbit and possum in the loose in the herd. We'd seen them things. They was ghost cows. From the emailer. I've been to Stampede Mesa once a long time ago. Below the drop-off, where the cows had fallen, every kick of the dust brought up cattle bones. The big cottonwood is gone, and whatever markers left for the cowboys who died on Stampede Mesa have rotted away. Over on the McNeil Draw side, there is a tangle of ancient, badly rusted barbed wire. I went to Stampede Mesa in the daylight. I don't think I'd care to go there after dark. So many thanks to both the emailer of the story and C.F. Eckhart. Whichever you are the author, it is a great tale and does belong on Ron's Amazing Stories. Well, there you have it. 3 tales sent in by you guys. Was it too much? Did you get tired of me talking? Please let me know and send your feedback to ronsamazingstories@gmail.com. If you want to hear your story on the program, it could not be easier. Go to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com, click on the Contact tab, and tell me all about it. If you want to chat about it first, just leave me your contact information, and I will get in touch with you. Please do this. I need your stories. And now this. I have talked enough. Let's get back to the stories with this one from Challenge of the Yukon. Sled Dog King shines in this one as he protects just about everybody from the wolf pack. It first aired January 27th, 1944.
The Challenge of the Yukon. I'm King, and you husky! King, the swiftest and strongest of Eskimo lead dogs, blazes the trail through storm and snow for Sergeant Preston as he meets the Challenge of the Yukon. Sergeant Preston was typical of the small band of Northwest Mounted Police who preserved law and order in the Yukon during the gold rush of '98. That was the year that brought over 50,000 men swarming into the Klondike region, and the greed for gold led to frequent violence and bloodshed. But in spite of the odds against them, the force preserved a splendid record in maintaining the right. The challenge of the North was answered, and justice ruled triumphant. Dan McGregor's cabin was in one of the most isolated stretches of the Yukon wilderness. Far off the trail, it was a long, tedious journey to civilization even in good weather. In the blast of the terrible winter, it was almost impossible to travel. Inside, the cabin was warm and cozy. Dan's young wife, Mary, busied herself putting dishes away, while Dan and an old sourdough, Clancy O'Connell, sat talking before the heartening blaze of a good fire. Dan held a young baby on his knee. Clancy broke the friendly silence that had fallen on the happy group.
Yes, sir, by golly, that young'un sure is growing. Just look at how he's watching you, Dan.
Bright as a button, aren't you, son? You know, Clancy, I was afraid of having him and Mary stay up here.
Look, there's a man for you. The children weren't raised in the wilderness before. I'll wager you won't find a healthier-looking baby anywhere.
You're right there, Mary. I declare, I ain't ever seen a smarter-looking tyke. He'll be a rich man someday.
You bet your life he'll be.
Say, Dan,
Yeah?
last time you was to town, did you see anything of McLean?
Mm-hmm.
Did he have anything to say about the mine?
Just asked me how it was coming.
You gave him all the details, I reckon.
Well, sure. If it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't be so well off this winter. I don't mind telling you, I was ready to give up when he staked me. You got something on your mind, Clancy. Might as well spill it.
No, I was just thinking, that's all.
Thinking what?
I've been knocking around up here for more years than I like to remember, Dan. And you can take my word for it, a man meets all kinds, good and bad. I always did think McLean was one of the bad ones.
He's mighty good to me.
Well, why shouldn't he be? You paid him back 5 times over for what he ever staked you. It's none of my business, though.
Hey, that's funny. Visitors. Here, take the baby, Mary.
People don't usually go visiting this time of year, son.
Hi there, Dan.
McLean, what brings you up here?
Oh, just came up with the boys for a spell. Send to the dogs, will you, Pete?
Sure. Here, you huskies.
Don't mind if we come in, do you, Dan?
Well, no.
Hi, boys. Oh, Miss McGregor. Mighty comfortable place you got here.
First time you've been up here, isn't it?
Yeah. I guess you're pretty well fixed for supply.
Now, we took care of that a long time ago. We've got enough caribou meat to see us through the winter.
That's good. I'm glad to hear it. Now, you're better fixed than anyone this side of Melville.
How's that?
The supply boats ain't come through yet.
Oh,
Yeah, it's bad.
Bad. That ain't half of it.
we have plenty here. If you men need food, we'll be glad to share some of our supplies with you.
Sure.
But that ain't exactly what I had in mind, Miss McGregor.
If it isn't food you want, Mr.
Oh, it's
McLean.
food we want, all right. But we don't aim to take no share of what you got here.
Well, you're welcome to it.
We're taking all of it, Dan.
You're what?
Yeah, you heard me, old-timer.
He's joking, Dan. He can't possibly
I
mean
never
it.
joke. Dan knows that.
Why, that dirty swine. I always knew he wasn't
Don't reach
fit
for that gun, Grandpa. You just do what I say.
You're holding the gun, Mac. Go ahead. What's on your mind?
Well, me and the boys have come a long way. A mighty long way, just to make you a proposition.
A proposition, he calls it,
We
yes.
started out with all the supplies we could get our hands on.
Buying supplies, of course.
Come on, McLean. Get to the point.
Yeah, boss. Cut out the gab and give it to him
Shut up, I'm running this outfit. And now that we're here, we're willing to let you and Mrs. McGregor have a day's supplies for you and the dog.
Now, wait a minute. We're not leaving this cabin.
You're leaving right now.
But the baby.
That's your concern, not mine.
But it's murder. You know we can't reach the trading post. Why'd it take us 3 days?
My. Now, ain't that too bad? I'm sorry, Dan. That's all the food we can spare. You can go on short rations, you know.
We ain't budging, you sputting coyote. We'll stay here if I
Who
have
said
to take...
anything about you going? Oh, you're staying here. I figure we need a hand to take care of washing dishes and the like.
What?
You better start getting your dogs ready, McGregor. You got a long trip ahead of you.
A sharp wind whipped Sergeant Preston mercilessly as he urged his team over the trail. Ahead of the pack ran the great dog King, alert and watchful. Watching him, the Mountie smiled, for he knew the wilderness held no terror for King.
He's glad to have a job to do. Seems to enjoy running against the wind. On, King! On, you huskies! We've got a job to do this time, all right. Melville doesn't soon get some supplies, but... What is it? What is it? What's wrong, King, huh? Ho, you huskies, ho! Oh, now, look. We don't want to waste any time, boy. This trail is... Very well, King, you win. Which way, huh? Don't pull me, I'm coming. Can't see a thing, this wind is... Oh, over the crest of that hill, huh, fella? Well, we'll have a look. A man and woman. Now, who in the world would be on the trail in weather like this? You go back and bring the dogs, King. That's right, boy. I'm going down there. With a sickly-looking fire like that, they need help. Hello there!
Help! Help!
Why, it's Dan McGregor and Mary. And she's holding their young baby.
I don't know who you are, stranger, but we're sure glad you've come.
Dan, it's Sergeant Preston.
Mary and Dan, what in the world?
Oh,
Oh, now, wait a minute, Mary. Last time I saw Dan in town, he told me you were all set to hole in for the winter. What happened?
We're all set. But Mac McLean came up to the cabin yesterday and drove us out.
We've used up what food we had.
Well, I have some supplies on the sled. We'll add more wood to the fire and have some ready for you in a few minutes. Meanwhile, I want you to tell me about McLean.
It was shortly after dark. In Dan McGregor's cabin, the fire burned brightly. Mac McLean paced the floor restlessly with his hands in his pockets, outlining a recently hatched scheme to his men. Clancy, the rugged old prospector, washed at the dishes sullenly, his sharp ears taking in every word of the conversation.
Yeah, it was a lucky break for us when you spotted the Morning Star down the river, Pete.
Yeah. If we take over the supplies she's carrying, we can name our own price in Melville. She's stuck solid.
Yeah, stuck solid. What could be better? I'll tell you what I want you and Lefty to do, Pete.
Well, I'm listening.
Make your way down to the trail, then get down to where the Morning Star is and see how many windows are lighted up. Maybe we can get a rough idea how many men are on board.
All right. It won't take us more than 15 minutes to
Make
do
sure
that.
it don't. We can't afford to waste much time.
Right.
Hey, where you going, Grandpa?
Just going out for a breath of fresh air, what I don't get in here.
Oh, no, you ain't.
If you wasn't so busy planning how to keep food from starving mouths, you'd have noticed the fire's burning low and we need wood. You going to get it or do I?
All right.
I could have swore I saw someone moving over in that timber. But I don't see him now. Rotten varmints. I only hope Dan and Mary eat. Hey, what in the... Looks like a dog coming from the trees. Well, I'll be a friendly one, ain't you, boy? Good-looking husky. Yeah, what's the... Yeah, looks like a note of something in his collar. Let's see, seems like... Yeah, it's a pencil. I have to go over here. Gotta keep down. Light from the window ought to be enough to read by. By golly, it's from Sergeant Preston. Here, boy. I'll send this back with you. And hurry back here before they get suspicious.
Back in the cabin a half hour later, Clancy puffed silently on his pipe, while Mac McLean peered anxiously out of the window.
Seems like they ought to be back by now, Mac.
Yeah, the darn fools. What's keeping them?
Them blasted wolves get on my nerves. Sounds like a whole pack.
Yeah, you're dead.
Daft nothing. Pete and Lefty'd be back here by now if... I'll lay you 10 to 1 they ran into trouble. A pack of it.
Come on, I've had enough of this waiting around.
Them wolves are mighty hungry this time of year, McLean. And they ain't particular about their meat, neither.
Shut up. When I want your opinion, I'll ask you for it. Get your gun, Red. You too, Slim.
I don't like this,
I ain't asking you if you do or not. I'm boarding the Morning Star, see? The day after tomorrow, we'll start for Melville with enough supplies to sell to set us up for life.
As the three men left the cabin, sharply silhouetted against the snow, they were watched by Sergeant Preston. King stood at his master's side, every muscle tense, his keen eyes following the progress of McLean and his men.
You were right, Sergeant. Here they go. The three of them.
Out to look for our friends here. It was a good job of gagging them, Dan.
I'd like to have brained both of them.
But never mind. They'll get what's coming to them when we get them back to Melville. Clancy was right about the Morning Star being down the river. Look, Dan.
The back door of the cabin. It's Clancy.
He's heading this way. Go to meet him, King. We'll wait till they're far enough away from the cabin for me to circle around them. Then, Mary, you go back into the cabin with the baby. We can't risk keeping you out in the cold any longer.
Bless me. This ain't the best luck I ever struck.
Quick, we have no time to lose. Clancy, you stay here and guard the prisoners.
Prisoner? How'd you... Oh, don't worry none, Sergeant. I'll take good care of them both.
Come with me, Dan. Ready, King?
Good luck to you.
Thanks. We'll need it.
There they are, Sergeant.
Yes, I see them. They're making slow progress. All right, King. Start howling like a wolf. Come on, Dan. Let's see how good our imitations are. Down, King. Duck, Dan. That was close.
It must have sounded like the real thing.
Only one man fired, Dan. And I'm sure it wasn't McLean. Yeah, see? He's turning on those two like a savage.
The morning star must be just around that bend. If your plan works...
It's got to work. Come on, Dan. I'll get the protection of these rocks. King, you circle around to that big rock. When I call, you charge them. Understand, fella? Oh, good boy. Off now. All right, Dan. Open up on them. Get them, King. Get them.
Hey, what's that? Shoot it! Shoot! Get away from me! Shoot him! Oh, my gun! He tore it out of my hand!
Come on, Dan. Rush them. Here come the man from the Morning Star. All right, King. Down, boy. Down, fella. You, throw down your guns.
Throw him down. That wolf's making off with him.
Look again, McLean. It's no wolf.
Hey, what's all this about? My men heard the shots.
Captain Oakes?
That's right.
Sergeant Preston of the Mounted Police. These men were planning to force their way on board your boat to steal the supplies. We thought when we heard the gunfire you'd come to investigate, trapping them between two fires.
It seems like you had the situation pretty well under control before we even got here, Sergeant. It's a mighty good thing you stopped them. We've been stuck for so long, we'd have probably welcomed them as a committee from Melville.
You're under arrest, McLean. You and your men. It was nothing short of an attempted murder when you turned the McGregors out to freeze on the trail.
Say, is there a cabin in this wild-looking country?
Within walking distance, Captain. We'll carry some of your supplies to Melville on sleds. They're badly needed.
I know they are. But we've been helpless here. Got stuck in a sandbar on the river, and by the time we got loose from that, the freeze set in. We sure ain't running a corner to schedule this trip.
On your feet, McLean.
Not so.
You're heading back to town.
A dog. And I thought it was a wolf.
Your friends thought the same thing. But we managed to capture them without any gunplay. Yes, King, you've done a good job. We've done all we set out to do, and more. With your help, the case is closed.
Challenge of the Yukon, a copyrighted feature of the Challenge of the Yukon Incorporated, brought to you each week at this same time, originated in the studios of WXYZ Detroit. The characters and events in tonight's drama were fictitious. Bob Height speaking. This is the Michigan Radio Network.
What can I say about that series? It was made by the same folks in Detroit that brought you The Lone Ranger. They had a knack for presenting stories that take you into the scene and make you feel like you're right there. Amazing broadcast, and to think that most of the Challenge of the Yukon episodes were only 14 minutes long. That supports the adage, less is more. And now, this 5-minute mystery.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is brought to you by Computers Everywhere. If you don't have a computer, then how are you listening to this? Remember, take your computer to lunch, or maybe just give it a big hug. Computers do need that. Always remember, a happy computer is one that is loved. Brought to you by Computers Everywhere.
Extra, extra, read all about it. Read all about the murder of millionaire Timothy Fuller. Thank you, sir. Timothy Fuller murder unsolved. Read all.
Who shall I say is calling, sir?
Jack Curtis of the Evening Record.
Oh, yes, Mr. Curtis. If you will follow me, sir, Mr. Fuller will see you.
Mr. Fuller?
I'm Leslie Fuller. It was my father who was killed.
According to reports, the case isn't progressing so well.
No, it isn't, Mr. Curtis. Seems to be a complete mystery as to who could have killed my father.
I wonder if it might be possible for me to talk with the other members of the household.
Oh, yes, of course. There's just my sister Barbara, Barton the butler, and myself.
Did you ring, sir?
Oh, yes, Barton. Mr. Curtis would like to talk to you and my sister. Will you go for her? She's in a room.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Fuller, were you at home the night your father was killed?
I'm a radio news commentator, Mr. Curtis, and at the time my father was killed, I was on the air.
Oh, I don't believe I've ever heard you on the radio, Mr. Fuller.
It's quite possible that you haven't, Mr. Curtis. My commentaries are broadcast in shortwave, unless you had a shortwave receiver.
Oh, yes, yeah, of course.
Did you want to see me, Leslie?
Oh, yes, Barbara. May I present Mr. Curtis of the Evening Record? He wants to ask you some questions.
How do you do, Mr. Curtis?
Oh, how do you do?
You remain also, Barton.
Yes, sir.
Where were you at the time Mr. Fuller was killed, Barton?
I was in the kitchen, sir. I was helping cook polish the silver. When I heard the shot, I ran into the drawing room and found Mr. Fuller slumped over in his chair.
Shot through the head, wasn't he, Barton?
Yes, sir.
And where were you at the time, Miss Fuller?
Oh, I was here in the library. I was lying on the sofa listening to Leslie on the radio when I heard the shot. I never miss him.
Radio? What radio?
Oh, that old portable over there on the desk.
Oh, I see. Where is the cook, Mr. Fuller?
She left this morning. She was terribly upset, and the police said it would be all right.
I see. Oh, that's a very beautiful picture of you there on the desk, Miss Fuller. Do you have another one like it?
Why, yes, of course, but...
Oh, I don't want it for myself, Miss Fuller. I want it for my paper.
Just what are you driving at, Curtis?
Just that your sister's picture will appear in the paper tomorrow under the headline, Daughter Murders Father.
But that's fantastic. You have no reason in the world to believe that I murdered him.
No, I don't I? Well, you made one statement that convinced me immediately that you were lying.
What was the statement that led Curtis to believe that Barbara was lying? In a moment, we'll let you know, but first...
Have you got it all figured out? I have to tell you, I used gigabytes to figure this one out. It all has to do with bullet trajectory, time intervals, and the space-time continuum. Put it all together and what you have is the impossible. And as Sherlock Holmes was fond of saying, if that is all you have left, then that is what you have, or some such thing. Let's go hear the results of this one. But like I said, the butler did it.
Now, back to our mystery.
Yes, Miss Fuller, you made one statement that convinced me immediately that you were lying. Your alibi was that at the time the shot was fired, you were lying in here listening to your brother's commentary on the radio. That's impossible, Miss Fuller. Your brother broadcasts on short wave. Short wave is something different, Miss Fuller, and requires a special receiving set. You could hardly expect me to believe that you heard your brother on that old portable radio you have here. It just wouldn't work. Get your hat and coat, Miss Fuller. Where you're going, you'll have a long time to figure out the intricacies of short wave.
Well, okay then. The butler didn't do it, but some of what I thought was right. Okay, I was way off, but this 5-minute mystery was brought to you by Computers Everywhere. Be sure to take your computer to lunch, or maybe just give it a big hug. Computers do need that. Remember, a happy computer is one that is loved. Brought to you by Computers Everywhere.
The Skelly Oil Company, you know, was the originator of tailor-made gasoline. And tonight, I'm going to tell you something I just found out about mittens. Yeah, that's right, mittens. You know, the 3 little kittens lost their mittens, those things. Well, now, what I found out about mittens is this. You see, we have different kinds of mittens for different parts of the country and for different kinds of weather. Way up in northern Minnesota and Wisconsin, they put on 2 pairs of woolen mittens and a pair of leather ones besides sometimes. Not quite so far north, around, Iowa and Illinois, for instance, a single pair of mittens will do if they're good and heavy. And further south, a pair of good fleece-lined gloves will keep the frost out of your fingertips. And way down south, of course, well, gloves are just something to dress up in or work with. And mittens, well, they hardly know what mittens are for. Well, now, and here's the point of the whole story. Think of this. Wouldn't it be silly if all these folks that wear all these different kinds of gloves and mittens, wouldn't it be silly if they all tried to use the same kind of gasoline in their cars? Why, of course it would. They need different kinds of gasoline just as much as they need different kinds of mittens. They need gasoline that's tailor-made to fit their weather. Isn't that right? So look, when you're out driving, watch for the big red, white, and blue sign that marks every Skelly service station, because that's where you can get Skelly tailor-made gasoline. You see, Skelly tailor-made gasoline is weather right because it's tailor-made to fit the weather in each part of the country where it's sold. It's weather right for your car wherever you buy it. So remember what I told you about mittens. Wear mittens that are made for your kind of weather and use gasoline that's weather right, too. That's Skelly tailor-made gasoline, good old Skelly Aeromax. Tell Dad to try a tank full tomorrow. Now, here's something your dad should hear about. Skelly gasoline is tailor-made for quick starting in your weather. It's weather right for your car. So it not only helps you start faster, it gives you faster pickup, too. If you want your car to pull out in front of traffic, if you want your family car to be the first to get away when it starts at a traffic light, you just ask Dad to try Skelly tailor-made gasoline. And once he tries it, he'll say it's a grand gasoline. And I'll bet he uses it from then on. And boy, oh boy, will you be proud of the way your family car starts and the way it steps out ahead of the rest on the road. Yes, sir. For fast starts and real pickup, tell Dad to try Skelly tailor-made Aeromax gasoline tonight.
Well, there you have it. That was the whole show. And I want to thank the three authors that provided their stories to us today. You guys are fantastic. Coming up next week, we're going to have a good old-fashioned detective week. So, please don't miss it. Want to keep up with what's happening on Ron's Amazing Stories? Please follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or sign up for the weekly newsletter. All the links you're going to need and access to the blog can be found at ronsamazingstories.com. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.
All of the vintage audio used in the podcast is believed to be in the public domain. Ron's Amazing Stories does not own the rights to any of the old-time radio used here. If you hold the rights to any of the shows played, please contact us immediately at ronsamazingstories.com.